can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
Welcome back to Changing Hearts and Minds. We all remember the feeling that this time of year brought us as kids. The chill in the air seemed to only be made more crisp by the feelings brought by the tales of unexplained and scary occurrences. No matter how old we become, or how much we learn to use critical thinking and logic, there are always some things we just cannot explain, or things that we choose to just dismiss as unknown. For the next 2 weeks, Changing Hearts and Minds is going to have guests, veterans, show fans, and even hosts from some of the other Change Your POV networks on, as we take some time to have a little bit of fun and talk about the unexplained, creepy, and outright frightening. Each guest will share a personal story of an experience with the weird, unexplained, or scary, and then we'll offer a documented case of horror or mystery that is true, and we'll be sure to have you checking the dark corners and wondering if the things that go bump in the night are more than just creaky old houses, or are they real? Be advised, if you have little ears that are around, be aware many of the topics in the next 2 episodes are about more than just myths. We will discuss serial murder and horrors that are part of the topics that are actually real and may scare or even damage little children. Some of you other adults out there may even be damaged, so be warned. Our first guest on this Halloween special 2-part show is Scott. Scott is my cousin. He's a big fan and supporter of the Change Your POV network. He's always rating us, listening to all the episodes, and he's a Patreon supporter, so he gets to come on and participate in the show. Now let's jump in and see what our first guest has for us. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks very much. I am happy to be here. Happy to support the show. I've actually told you this before. I love the way that you and other people on the network are creating and kind of expressing the parallels between, people coming out of the military and people trying to get into corporate environment. My goal is to try and understand those parallels so that I can create better leaders here. And it's an honor to be on with you guys. I know I'm not going to talk about all that stuff, and I like that we're not talking about that. This is a very different show, so it's good stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I do appreciate your feedback.
Yeah, and you know what? It's actually pretty refreshing. There are some people who will not admit to being related to me, so it's great to hear you actually say that out loud.
Actually, I think you and I are the only 2 people that some people might want to admit that they were related to. Some of our other relatives, people may not want to admit they're related to, but we're still pretty good. So we'll go ahead and start off with you just telling us what personal experience have you had around the Halloween time, or not have to be around Halloween, but that is unexplained, kind of creepy, and kind of weird.
So I actually thought of a couple of things, and my first response was, I absolutely hate talking about the paranormal. It freaks me out, and it really does. I can't watch The Exorcist, and quite honestly, I can't even look at Craig T. Nelson in the same way I used to when I watched Coach. Ever since seeing him in Poltergeist, freaks me out. So let me tell you a couple of stories. We'll start off with my nun in the 8th grade, and quite honestly, I told you the nuns in Catholic school swore me off Halloween forever. So my 8th grade nun, and I can't remember her name for the life of me, but she tells me the story. She was down doing missionary work in South America. And the missionary work, they're trying to help the people in the village, and the village leaders didn't really like their presence there. One of those village leaders came in, talked to the head nun of whatever convent or mission they were in, and was explaining that they didn't like them there, and the town leader, there was some heated words back and forth, and they calmed things down, and the town leader basically wanted a peace offering from the nun, and said, I want a lock of your hair. Now, this is a nun telling me this story, by the way. It has to be true. Nuns don't lie. Has to be true. So the head nun goes into another room. I don't want to give this person a lock of my hair. Very bizarre request. She combs out a piece of the carpet in the next door room. And as the story goes, later that night, my nun, an 8th grade teacher, tells me that she sees the carpet elevate off the ground and float out the door.
Awesome voodoo stuff, huh? Crap.
And she is also the nun who told me that Halloween is a pagan ritual. It is honoring and worshiping pagan saints, and it's evil, and no Catholic school kid should do this. And she scared me to death. I can't stand Halloween to this day.
Well, that's you're talking about him wanting her hair, and what she did was brilliant. And I'm sure that at the time she probably knew better, which is why she went and combed out some hairs out of the carpet, because you don't go down to those countries and hand some witch doctor your hair, your fingernail clippings, like nothing. That's just ugh. Yeah, sometimes I think some of the Catholic nuns in Catholic school, even when you went to Catholic school, or when I went to Catholic school, sometimes I thought they were just saying stuff to scare us, but you would look at the other nuns' faces, and they believed what she was saying. So it wasn't like some kind of I'm going in the back we need to scare these kids into, complying. So I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make something up real quick. And, as long as I don't use the Bible or use, if it's all voodoo and pagan gods, then it's all right. So it's not the Bible that I'm saying is evil. I'm saying these other religions are evil. So that's a creep story.
And I've got to tell you, this nun was the nun. 8 years of Catholic school was difficult, to say the least. And this nun was the nun who started to turn me around in 8th grade and get me, ready to get out of that school and do the right thing. And I really believed in her. She was an awesome person. So I had no reason to doubt this story. And I remember this story, and I remember her telling me to this very day. So it's true, no doubt.
Even if you go as far as to say she maybe drank some ayahuasca and she hallucinated it, she still experienced the experience, and we can't explain it, so it falls into what we're saying. So it's definitely inside there. Now this other one is fun, because this next topic, I've actually read every single book on this gentleman, partly because the story is massively interesting, but mostly because everything that he did and everywhere he did it at was the places we grew up at, to some respects the same place you live at. Up to and including, and this would be funny, I'll put in there. There was a fear I had not too long ago, like a couple weeks ago, that I'm going to talk to you about when we tell this story, and once we go into it, you'll know why. I had some worries about a trip that me, my wife, and my kid had made where I didn't pick the certain hotel we were staying at right outside of Giant Stadium. If you remember when we go into the story, everyone will start to realize why. So
we're talking about Kuklinski. I don't know that we want to call him a serial murderer. He was a contract killer. He worked as essentially a paid hitman for the mob. And one of the interesting things, so when you talk about the guy's background, right? So grew up in the Polish section of Jersey City, son of Irish and Polish immigrants, very much the same as your grandfather and my father. They're Irish and Polish immigrants came in the exact places they grew up. Your grandfather, my father, on the total opposite and right side of the law. Good stuff. But this is the same neighborhood where he grew up. His mother was a devout Irish Catholic. His father worked on the railroad. His father was massively abusive to him as a child.
I mean, I think he abused one of his own brothers to death, right? One of the brothers died. And the story is that the parents abused him to death.
That is exactly right. Violent alcoholic, beat the kids regularly, beat Kuklinski regularly, and actually his older brother. The reports are that parental abuse killed his older brother. So this is the kind of environment he grew up in. Never went to high school. Reportedly, according to him, his stories, killed his first victim at the age of 14.
Yeah, 1948. 1948, he killed this. He was a bully, right? Like a local bully?
It was some sort of local bully, some sort of local gang thing, and disrespected him, and that was the end of it.
I read at some point that he made a statement that was when he learned that it was better to give than receive. And
it was, yep.
He was talking about
empowering.
violence. Yeah.
His words, it was empowering.
Now, when you talk about, creepy and unexplained, where this gets to be creepy is your opening statement where you say, he was a contract killer, and that's where he goes down legally. But according to Philip Carlo, the author who did the most amount of work on this guy, who had spoken with him, and this is the guy that really brought out a lot more of the evil that was within this gentleman, was that he spent probably the first 50 deaths not contract kill. He was just killing people to go over and beat and killed bums in Manhattan at nighttime, leading up into when he met up with the Gambinos and the families that are in New Jersey that he worked for. And I don't think so. Therefore, my personal opinion is he's a serial killer who was able to monetize his craft. And so the only thing that makes him a contract killer for crime and not a serial killer, as we know what serial killers are, was the fact that he was getting paid by the mob to do it. Most serial killers would say that it was an urge that they have. So when you think about if you had a job, if you had an urge to do things that were massively dangerous, like get drunk and drive, but you worked in, let's say, the army and jumped out of airplanes, you probably would be able to fill your need to try to get yourself killed through your job. And so that's all he did was fulfill those urges he had through his own job. You
know what they say, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
That man must have had he must have been getting so happy because this dude killed a lot of people. So this guy goes on killing, and he's killing in and around the area. And one of the funny stories I had is I remember going to visit my great uncle, your father, or going to visit my grandmother over on Duncan and West Side, and there was always the Mr. Softy truck that was around, and everyone knew about the Mr. Softy truck. But then everyone, like my uncle buddy, and a couple of that, they would always tell me stay away from Mr. Softy, and I didn't get it when I was a kid, like a young kid. And then when I started reading about Kuklinski, I found out that this guy's name, his last name was Prongi. He was the Mr. Softy guy for the neighborhood. He was actually a former Green Beret who was another paid killer, worked with Kuklinski, and Kuklinski apparently killed this guy and left him under the Pulaski Skyway, parked in his truck dead.
So I didn't know he actually killed him. I knew that they were partners on a lot of things, and they traded some secrets on how to kill. But I didn't know he actually killed him.
Well, he doesn't take credit for the kill, but it was one of Kuklinski's big, and this is the only saving grace about this guy. One of his rules was he never killed women and children. He said he would never do that. And when Prongi came to him and asked him to kill his wife and kids, I think that's when, according to the book, he said that something had to be done, and he made sure that Prong wouldn't be able to get someone else to do it because Kuklinski didn't do it. Next page is a picture of him dead inside of his Mr. Softy truck. So, they're kind of implying, without actually saying, that this maniac killed. And then this is where it crosses over to where everyone in America has heard of this guy, whether they know it or not. First of all, his nickname was the Iceman. Why'd they call him the Iceman, Scott?
So the Iceman is his MO was he would freeze the bodies so that when those bodies were found, it was really difficult to figure out time of death. He'd put them in the freezer. He used all sorts of things, whether it was cyanide, knives, guns, you name it. He killed them in all sorts of ways. But then he would freeze the bodies in order to mask or hide from anyone who would find that body the time of death.
Right. So when I first started looking into this guy and I saw the name of the Iceman, I thought, well, that's just a clever name the mob came up with. But no, it's actually the Bergen County Sheriff's Department came up with that name when they started finding these bodies that had crystallized flesh still inside of them. They were like, this guy's pretty smart, but he's getting sloppy. Then the York Motel. So here's where it crosses over. Every single person in America has always been told when you go into a hotel that looks a little seedy, check under the bed to make sure there's no bodies there. And it's become so commonplace that it's almost like an urban myth that somebody found a dead body under a bed. But guys, it's not an urban myth. Somebody found a dead body under the bed. But in room number 31 of the York Motel in North Bergen, which is right near the tunnel entrance. Everyone's seen this hotel that's up there. People have stayed at it. I didn't really know where it was, but he killed one of his associates in that hotel room. And when he didn't have a way to get the body out, he stuffed it under a bed. People stayed in the room for like 2 weeks before someone found out the body was there. It's insane.
And here's a guy led. If you watch the movie, that I think they give him a little bit too much credit for compartmentalizing and leading a normal life. But he led a middle class life, lived in Dumont, Bergen County, typical middle class community. He had people over to the house, barbecues, planning trips. His daughter was in the hospital, and he would actually go to the hospital and play Santa Claus. So his ability to turn it on and off like hot and cold running water was, for me, the scariest piece of this guy's life. The fact that he can come, there's stories he used to go and frequent hot dog trucks down in Hoboken, and the guys would look at him like he's just a regular businessman. He comes
except for him being 6'2" or 6'5" and 300 pounds, right?
Yeah, and the fact that he kills people for a living. And, his thing was, if I kill people, and this is what he said in the documentary, if I kill people, I'm expecting 5 figures, but kind of high 5 figures, and I'm thinking, well. They credit him with anywhere between 100 and 250 deaths, and if he made that kind of money on even half of those, he was doing all right.
Yeah, when we think about like people who are just soulless and have absolutely no heart and can turn it on and off, as you said, a lot of the veterans who are listening to the show, much like me, are thinking to themselves, we're kind of giggling inside like you've never seen us overseas as compared to when we're home. But guys, we're not talking about that, because what we've never done is make one of the worst members of the mob call us soulless. So DeMeo, who worked for the Gambino family, had asked Kuklinski to kill someone, and Kuklinski, he told him to make him suffer. So Kuklinski took this guy out to Pennsylvania, put him inside of a cave, tied up, put cameras on him, and then filmed the guy get ate to death by rats. And then he brought the video and was eating popcorn and laughing about it in front of DeMeo, and DeMeo's like, this guy's got no soul. So when you've got some of the worst people in the world saying you've got no soul, you've got to have some kind of anger and some real demons going on inside of you. This guy was definitely evil, and they finally caught up with him. They caught him eventually, and apparently if you read the book, and I don't know if the movie, I don't recall if the movie, and there is a movie about it that's not too great of a movie, but it's all right. But the documentaries are good. The book is good. If you see in the movie, he didn't go down quietly when they came and got him. It took like 6, 7, marshals to hold this guy down. And even watching the HBO documentaries, the Iceman tapes, it's scary to watch this guy sit there, and you can see the psychosis and the anger inside him turn on and off, especially in the episodes with the psychiatrist talking to him.
You could see the absolute blankness in his eyes when he talks about what he's done. And that disconnect, that ability to have a family, run a life, and then completely turn that off and disconnect. They talk about stories where he'd be home and going off, and he was violent to his family and not really the kids, but beat his wife. But he'd be going off and laying waste to the house, and then the phone would ring. It'd be a business associate. He'd have a cordial conversation, small talk, the whole thing. Hang up the phone, and then just launch right back in to destroying the household. And right. He could turn it on and off that quick.
Yeah, one of the other really weird stories was him getting Christmas Eve. He's sitting at home putting together the kids' toys. He just had somebody that owed money to him on his mind, and somebody had called him and said, "Hey, this guy's down here at some bar throwing money around like nothing." So he just he said okay, and he stopped putting the kids' toys together, drove into Jersey City to the bar. Had the guy come outside, talk to him in his car, blew his brains out in the car, and then got back. You left the body in the car outside the bar that the guy owned, and took his $5,000 out of the $10,000 he had in the pocket. He's like, I didn't take more than he owed me. I just took what he owed me. And then he goes back home, and he goes right back to putting the bikes together for the kids. I mean,
so
yeah, big deal.
This is normal.
This is business. It's not personal. It's business.
I think that it became business for him, and he tells the one story where he actually appeared to show regret, but I don't really know if it was. And he had the one guy, and I forget the details of the story, but he gets him into a place, and it's a contract kill, right? He's paid to kill this guy.
Talking about the God one?
The guy's screaming and crying, God, no, don't let. And he said, I said, you know what? If you really believe in God, pray to God for the next half hour and see if he comes and changes your situation. And he actually sat back and looked at it, and he said, I shouldn't have done him like that.
Right. And I think that shows how there's still, you could be a monster, and that he still it became business for him, because he regretted the fact that he put that guy through what was another half hour before just getting, because he didn't have anything personal with this guy. This was like just a paid to go kill this dude. And
it added no value to his business. It added no value to his fact that I've got to end this It's over. It had no value. It was one of those things where, I think he got a thrill from the kill. I don't think he got anything out of putting somebody through any kind of mental anguish. That wasn't his thing.
Right.
He wanted to end life. You disrespected me, or hey, somebody's giving money. I'm good. I'll get rid of you, but I don't want to abuse you in the process. Now, that said, he's been paid to do things like, kill somebody, stuff a canary in their mouth and let them be found, kill somebody, take their tongue, cut their tongue off, shove it up their ass, and let that be found. That's the message we need to send. He had no problem doing that.
Yeah, for those of you not from New Jersey who don't know everything about what it's like to be around those kind of guys like me and Scott do, the canary is about you singing to the cops, and cutting your tongue off is because you squealed or ratted on someone and stuffed up your ass. So, Richard, the Iceman Kuklinski, the first monster because this guy really was a monster. What he did was scary and all that stuff that you read about him. The guy, when you talk about real monsters in the world, this is what we're talking about, because this is the guy that nobody around him that knew him as a family man ever would have seen. I mean, there was people shocked. I mean, literally shocked that this guy was who he really was. And who knows? Who knows what the real person is? Is it the person that's at home and is the family man that has the barbecues and everything? Or is it the guy that is out stalking the night, stuffing bodies under beds? Thanks a lot, Scott, for coming on. Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman, has only been identified with killing 5 people, but they say he's killed up to 200. He is a good example of what true horror and true monsters are. Well, let's jump in with our next guest, another big supporter, another listener who's always out there, and yes, another Patreon member. You guys are seeing a pattern here, right? Patreon members get to come on the shows unsolicited without being veterans. Yeah, they get extra stuff for being Patreon supporters. This next guy, his name is Nick. He likes to listen to podcasts that are about true crime mysteries. And he's got a real good one for you. Not to mention that his personal story kind of creeped me out. Hey, Nick.
Hey.
Let's jump right into it, brother. Go ahead and tell me your personal story of creepy weirdness that you cannot explain.
Okay. Now this one stuck with me for a while. This is from way back when. I grew up in upstate New York. I moved down to North Carolina when I was about 12 or 13.
Now, when you grew up in upstate New York, did you move away because of the trauma of being a Buffalo Bills fan and not winning 4 Super Bowls in a row?
Believe it or not, no, that was not the reason why.
Oh, but that would be traumatic nonetheless, wouldn't it?
It was, yeah, and that's not what my story is about. So.
No. Well, my story right now could be about being a Giants fan this season. But you go right ahead, buddy. Jump right into your story. Tell me all about it. Talk to Dr. Jeffrey. Let me see if I can help you out.
Okay, so this is about the house that we lived in when we lived in New York. Okay.
Yes, sir.
We didn't exactly live in the best area of town. There's a lot of stuff going on, and that was part of the reason why we ended up getting out of there.
Understood.
But we lived in a split level house, like most of the houses are up there. So it was actually there was an upstairs apartment, and then we lived in the downstairs where we had part of the upstairs, and then they had part of the upstairs.
Okay.
Now, I was really young at the time, so I didn't know what had happened. But as far as I knew, nobody else lived in that apartment upstairs. Wasn't quite sure why, but that's just what we knew.
Okay.
Anyway, so we had this shared attic space up there where the attic was kind of split in half. It was half for the apartment and then half for us. Mine and my brother's room, we were upstairs, very close to the attic. Some weird stuff starts happening at the house. First of all, the attic is creepy as hell. We do not go up there. But me and my brother, we hear stuff all the time. We swear it sounds like something's upstairs. We don't know what it is. Something is in the attic. So we do not mess with that attic. You can imagine being 10, 11 years old. We just didn't go up there.
Oh yeah, any kind of unknown noise or anything that's not easily explained or easily deducted by a child's mind can easily go to places that are just, terrifying.
Exactly. And then some weird stuff starts happening. Yeah, we had some things disappear. Some movies disappeared out of our bedroom. Mm-hmm. We had a stereo disappear from downstairs. And at this time, my older brother, who was about 16 or 17 at the time, he was getting in with a bad crowd. And this again was part of the reason why my parents were looking to move out of there.
Right.
And so we assumed that he had let some bad people in, that they'd stolen some stuff. So we get out of there.
Right.
Basically. Within the next few months, we move on down to North Carolina. But my brothers stay up there. My brothers, I live in that house that we lived in. My 2 older brothers stayed up there. They lived in the house. The rest of us moved down to North Carolina. Okay.
Right.
Less than a year later.
Okay.
There's a big snowstorm in New York, and I hear my mother tell us that my brothers are going to have to go sleep at my aunt's house because the furnace went out at the house that they lived in, the same house that I lived in previously.
Right.
So the furnace is out. So they're going to go stay somewhere else because it's too cold there. It's a snowstorm. They can't. So that night, we are sleeping like always, and the house phone rings in the middle of the night at about 1 a.m. And
this is in North Carolina.
This is in North Carolina, yes. My brother picks up the phone, and there's a voice on the other line simply saying, "I'm cold. I'm cold." We're like, "What? What?" And I'm sitting there looking at my brother, and he's like, "I don't know who this is. They're just saying they're cold." He hangs up the phone.
Right.
So
I'm not gonna lie to you, brother. I already got like douche chills going up my back of my spine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of creepy. Whoa.
Yes, it was. So they call back. Me thinking my brother's messing with me. I pick up the phone. Same thing. "I'm cold. I'm cold." I'm like, "Who is this?" And he's like, "Eddie."
Does Eddie mean anything to you?
Nothing at all.
Okay.
I'm freaked out. I hang up the phone. Okay.
Yeah.
Next, it keeps ringing throughout the night. Now my parents are up. They're on the phone. Me and my brother, we don't know what's going on. So this is what happened. It turns out that the apartment that was attached to our house, it had been raided by the cops at some point. Unbeknownst to me, because I was a little kid, I wasn't told this stuff. And they had arrested the guy who had lived there. They took him away. He went to jail. Okay. He had snuck back into the house. He had been living in that shared attic space.
Oh my God.
For multiple years. We think 1.5 to 2 years. We don't think he was up there all the time, but we think he was sneaking in and out randomly.
Geez, does it matter whether or not he was up there all the time? Just the fact that he was up there unknown to anybody.
Exactly.
Holy shit.
And then we start thinking, oh, well, we used to hear stuff. And then we remember, wait, we had movies disappear. We had a stereo disappear from the kitchen counter downstairs.
Yeah, in the common area where you guys live. And
Exactly.
Ooh.
So this guy had free access to our house when we were not there. And we had no idea. And he was a drug addict. Like, he was bad on drugs. And apparently that's why he called us saying he was cold that night.
Wait a minute. So it's verified that the phone call that you received from this Eddie was the Eddie that was living inside your guy's attic.
Yep, exactly. His name was Eddie Taylor. He had, once my parents heard that it was Eddie, they knew who he was. They knew who Eddie was because
they heard Eddie and they knew exactly who Eddie was when they heard the name Eddie.
Yep. Exactly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So whatever happened to Eddie? Did Eddie freeze to death in the house, or did Eddie just get cold and split town?
Yeah, good question. He split, as far as we know. I'm not even sure if my parents filed anything. I have no idea. I know that they had my brothers secure that place up, and that they made sure nobody else could get in there.
Holy crap!
But I don't think they actually called the cops or anything.
Jesus, Nick, that is some creepy shit right there, man.
Yeah,
that's creepy shit. And that's the thing. I tell people that a lot of these stories that I wanted to get people to talk about, I mean, they don't have to be paranormal. Creepy crap goes on. That's just part of like reality, and is just as scary. Like a lot of those podcasts you and I listen to, and me and Nick are very big fans of true crime podcasts.
Yeah,
and much like I believe it's Sword and Scale, so you find that some of the worst monsters are real.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff just really God, man, that is creepy shit. So moving on, then let's roll right into it. Your choice for the true life mystery / true life crime. I find is one of the most interesting ones that anyone's come up with yet. We're going to talk a little bit about what you could call which is joint hysteria or joint psychosis.
Yep.
Go ahead and talk to us. Go ahead and bring us in a little bit and tell us who we're going to be talking about here.
Okay, well, when you mentioned talking about a creepy case, one immediately stuck out to me because this is the creepiest thing I've ever heard. And this is the Erickson twins. This is Ursula and Sabina Erickson. They are two Swedish sisters who, as you mentioned, they are famous for having this shared psychosis.
Yeah, or whatever you'd call it. It's weird stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and you want to give a little bit of back. Let's talk about so everyone gets the idea. And guys, we will link the case and with the webpage for you to look into this stuff. We're not going to go too deep into it. We're going to cover the stuff about this case that is we're going to go one over the world with this stuff and kind of give you guys a good idea. But these two twins, they were Swedish-born twin sisters, fairly normal and attractive-looking girls, born in 1967. They were on vacation, as far as I understand. This is in May 2008. Folie à deux, which is what is shared psychosis is actually called, is an actual real medical condition. So why don't you talk about what was going on the M6 motorway in England in May of 2008? Where did all this start at?
Well, part of the reason this case has gained so much notoriety is because on the motorway that day, the police happened to be taping a reality TV show. And so a lot of
they were.
Little did they know. But so they got a call of some women walking around the motorway. Well, you want to start with the bus?
I'll let you jump back in there, but here's what happened. So these two women are on vacation, and as far as we understand, they had been in Ireland, random walking around in Ireland, and just generally the same kind of like vacation a young person would do coming out of high school who wants to go tour Europe and backpack Europe. It was kind of like one of those kind of vacations where these two twin sisters just, no history of mental illness, no history of drug use. They weren't running from anything. These were just two twin sisters on a vacation. They were on the British equivalent of a Greyhound bus. Apparently they started acting in a way that was very, very odd, and it brought up a lot of red flags to the bus driver. Up until the point where he was starting to have concerns about what was going on with these two girls. In his description, they were acting under the influence or suspicious and very paranoid. And they had asked to get off the bus, and he, in the best interest of the safety of himself and the other people on the bus, he had pulled over and appeased them and let them off the bus, and then had contacted the authorities, who had already been contacted about these two women acting oddly in the motorway. And from there, I'll let you take it from there as to what happens when the police arrive and try to confront Ursula and Sabina.
Yeah, so the police arrive, like I said, with a reality film crew following them. They were filming a show called Motorway Cops. Well, they had their hands full that day. When they showed up, they tried to hold on to the two girls. They were questioning them on the side of the road, and I would advise everyone to go watch this video because it was all captured on camera.
Yep, it sure was.
The two girls break away from the cops, and they just run out into traffic. Yes, exactly. They run out into speeding traffic on the highway.
One of them runs out into traffic, right? Now, I believe it was I think it's Sabina. She runs out into traffic and gets hit and knocked unconscious, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess she starts coming back around, and like she's completely out. Well, she comes back around and immediately starts fighting the cops as soon as so whatever was going on, their psychosis or whatever, wasn't just quelled by her being deemed unconscious. She gets knocked out, and when she wakes up, starts fighting the cops off again, right?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
then I guess Ursula runs out into traffic and this is all inside the footage, guys. She runs out and gets rolled, and I mean rolled by an 18-wheeler. It is some graphic footage. I mean, this woman gets rolled up underneath the 18-wheeler, and I guess it breaks both of her legs. So Ursula is deemed no longer mobile, although still alive. Sabina then immediately follows and runs out and runs into traffic and gets, pinballed and whack-a-moled by the traffic herself and gets knocked around all over the place. And she gets brought to the hospital along with Ursula. Now, Ursula and Sabina both go to the hospital. Ursula has got 2 broken legs, and she is not coming out of the hospital for some time. but Sabina gets looked at and talked to on the 19th of May and released
And we are told,
after like 24 hours in being held by the police. She was released because there was no reason to find her psychiatrically unstable, because from what I understand, there was no drugs in her system. There was no history of mental illness. Well, they kept going in and out of like cognitive ability to make sense, I guess.
yeah, and that's the part that's really interesting to me, is that all the police that interacted with her during this time, they say she was completely normal. They had no reason to think that there was anything wrong, that she had any sort of psychosis or anything.
Except for her random yelling and freaking out and running out into traffic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
just for the sheer sake. And you and I have talked about this, about whether or not the police or the law enforcement or the civil authorities made massive mistakes by not at least detaining these women for their own safety. Because all right, so maybe you can't predict any kind of danger to other people, even though running out into traffic, high-speed cars is dangerous to the motorists. But just the fact that they seem to be suicidal, I mean, at some points. So, I mean, I'm with you as far as why were they not held long-term because Sabina was only held for 24 hours and then released. Ursula, obviously, with two broken legs, wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah, I do get the sense that it is in a lot of people's best interest to represent these girls as crazy as possible. Because
right. At least for a 72-hour hold. In the United States, we have what's called 72-hour cooldowns. Anytime you have someone with a psychotic break, I'm assuming they don't have that in Europe. Yeah. So Sabina gets released. As far as the videos are concerned, and as far as I ever saw, was these videos that I've seen online and on different shows. I've seen the footage of Sabina and Ursula running out into traffic.
Yeah.
But nobody really knows the rest of the story, and it gets even darker as it goes on. That is just
the beginning.
Yeah. So what happens the next day, Nick? What happens when Sabina is released from custody?
Well, Sabina is released, and she somehow meets up with two men, one of them whose name is Glenn Hollinshead.
On May 29, in 19 May, Sabina is released. Now, this is all despite Sabina's shouts at the police the day before of they're going to steal your organs, and the policeman being yelled at, "I recognize you and I know you're not real." These are the kind of things these women were saying to the cops. But besides all that, and besides them running into traffic, they get released. So Sabina released without a full psychiatric evaluation, and pleading guilty to nothing but trespassing on the motorway and hitting a police officer. She gets released, and she's roaming around the streets of England, right? And she runs into two men, and one of the men was a 54-year-old Glenn Hollingshead. He was a self-employed welder, qualified paramedic, and former RAF worker, Royal Air Force. So he worked for the Air Force. The other man was his friend. His name was Peter Malloy. They were walking apparently, and they're walking their dog, and she comes up and she starts petting the dog, and they talk. They have a conversation with her. Sabina appeared to be behaving a little oddly, but the odd behavior didn't worry Glenn as much as it worried Molly, who actually had quite a lot of problems with what went on afterwards. So for whatever reason, and some people have said he had nefarious intent himself, but Glenn invites Sabina back to his house, where she was drinking and hanging out with him at the house, and she spent the night at Hollingshead's home. Now, no one knows what went on that night at Mr. Hollingshead's home, but apparently it was nothing that didn't lead to the morning being just fine, because Hollingshead was seen that morning coming out of the house after he had told her that he was going to take her to see her sister at the hospital. He goes to his next door neighbor and asks his next door neighbor to borrow some tea bags. Now, it is England, tea time and all that nonsense. So he borrows some tea bags, and he walks back in the house with tea bags. And then what happens right after he walks? I mean, no more than a minute after he walks back in the house with the tea bags, what happens, Nick?
Yes, quite literally within a minute. He comes staggering back outside, and his neighbor sees him. He stumbles up to his neighbor and says, "She stabbed me," collapses right to the ground. Then the neighbor sees Sabina flee right out the house, takes off, running down the road, and he calls 999.
That's the British version of 911, guys.
Yep, exactly. Sabina is not just running from this house. Sabina has a hammer in her hand.
As you would. After
Of
you
course.
get
Well,
after a good stabbing and a murder of a relatively innocent bystander, one must have a hammer to flee from the
exactly.
cops.
And while fleeing, she is hitting herself over the head with the hammer.
Now that's
As
just now.
she's-
See, she had me up until then.
Yeah.
Everything else makes sense, but beating yourself in the head with a hammer just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Guy passing in a car. He sees this and he tries to stop her. He gets out. He tries to take control of the hammer. But then he ends up getting struck over the head with something else she had in her pocket. Turns out
Yeah.
it was
They say it was a piece of what was it, tile?
something like that.
Something, and that's basically everywhere I've looked and everywhere I've researched. It always says that she had a piece of tile, which I'm thinking about maybe a 6 by 6 inch piece of tile that you make a floor or something like that out of, and she pulls it out of her pocket and she whacks him over the head. Another whack-a-mole incident, and she's able to break free. She makes her way to Heron Cross Bridge, which is on the A50. And it's a 12-meter high, which is 40 foot for us Americans. And it goes over another major thoroughfare roadway. And what does Old Savina do at the A50 bridge?
Well, to top off the day that she's been having so far, she decides to jump off.
Of course she does. Of course she does. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you jump off of a 40-foot bridge over another high-speed road?
Exactly. Shatters both her legs, much like her sister, and she's taken to the hospital.
She's taken to the hospital, and it's a hospital she gets visited by the police officers who have what to tell her about the condition of Mr. Hollingshead.
That he is dead.
Oh, he has died, yes.
Yes.
So, as they do, she is charged with murder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so they do, again, another set of tests, 0 drug use, 0 history of mental illness. I mean, and I mean, she's married with kids, and I don't think her family has any reason to believe that there's anything wrong with her. I mean, it just gets weirder and weirder. There is nothing in either one of these women's pasts to predict or indicate that any of this stuff's going to happen.
Yeah, that is the crazy part to me. It's almost like just getting together with her sister caused her to be psychotic for this small period of time. It's very odd.
I mean, she even pleads guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility, but they also can't diagnose her with being mentally incapacitated. So what's confusing to me, and this goes beyond just the creepiness factor, but this goes to the legal matter in hand. So she gets found guilty of manslaughter with diminished responsibility, but yet she is not diagnosed with having any mental illness. It is not attributed to any kind of drug or alcohol use. She serves, I think, a grand total of 5 years, 5 or 6 years in prison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And here's where it really gets creepy on the back end. After her 6 years in prison, where is Ursula and Sabina right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it. No one knows. They were released from prison. They've gone back home. They are completely free. And there's absolutely no current record of where they're at, what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the really creepy part of this case to me, and that's what makes me question the whole official story that we get. Only because we get to know very little about these sisters before the crime. We know very little about them after the crime, but we just this time period we get a little glimpse into their life and
or into some life.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know even if that's their life. The
the
bottom line is, in the end of the day, that one thing is for sure: these women exist. This is not some urban myth. This is not some story made up to scare people about picking up weirdos. These women actually exist. This actually did happen. The audio or the video footage from the English police officers of them running into traffic is real. I will link to it in the show notes page. You'll be able to see it. The murder is real. The fact that they served time is real. And the fact that once they were done serving their time, they were released is real. All of that's real. This is not a fake story. This is all actually real shit that actually happened.
And outside of this, they seem to live completely normal lives, which is the truly crazy part to me.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a truly crazy part. So much like Richard Kuklinski, which you guys heard earlier on when Scott was talking about it, these women are a good example of strangers can be dangerous. And, it's not that I'm trying to get the point across to people that you should avoid strangers at all costs, but you really don't know what's going on. And when someone's acting odd and weird, maybe take another second to think about how involved in whatever their story is for that moment in time you want to become a part of, because you can either become a part of the story as far as me and Nick are right now, where we're talking about it on a podcast, or you could become Glenn Hollingshead. And whatever his intent was for bringing her to his house, it was clear that his intent that morning was to get her back to her sister at the hospital, and something went very, very wrong inside that house in that minute from the time that he walked from getting tea bags to inside, and he paid for it ultimately with his life. And these women, unfortunately for them, they may be stuck living with whatever happened, whatever the psychosis was that they had deep inside of them. It's probably still dwelling there, and it could happen to anybody at any time if it could happen to somebody as normal as as Sabina and Ursula.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. The Erickson twins are seriously a twisted and weird story that I have not been able to find any explanation for in any book or any online document other than this shared psychosis that they seem to have had. So, next, let's go back to New Jersey to a veteran named Andrew. A veteran named Andrew that I went to high school with. Andrew and I were really old friends from high school. I went off to join the Army. Andrew stayed home for a couple years, then he joined the Navy, and then he eventually joined the Army, and he currently is still serving, and that's why he will only be referred to as Andrew and not his full name. And all the people that do know us that listen to the show will know who Andrew is, but anyone that doesn't know who Andrew is will just have to wonder who this guy is that went to high school with Jeff. And Andrew is joined with us today by his daughter, who is helping out. With telling the stories. So we get the stories in when we can and how we can. So
yeah.
So your story and your choice for the true life weird crime or mysterious place, your choice is actually directly connected, where your experience that you had is in the exact location of where we're going to talk about in the end. So let's start off with you. I'm going to let you go ahead. You just go ahead and tell us the story and take as long as you need to, and use as much detail as you can to tell us about what experience you had that was unexplained, completely creepy, and is fitting to be put on this the special Halloween episode of Changing Hearts and Minds.
Fall of '95 or winter of '96, but it's when I was going to Brookdale Community College, and started dating this girl from the area in Marlboro,
New Jersey.
Right. And so her and her best friend and her boyfriend decided to, they knew about this story and the psych hospital and all this, stories behind it. So they decided to take me out there with a few of their friends. And one of their friends brought a video camera. So we went out there. It was around, when the sun was just starting to set. So there was still daylight, but, when we got up to see the slaughterhouse was down this dirt road in the woods, and it was pretty much isolated from the streets and everything. So we walked about a mile in to when we finally came up to it, and on that block was at the Seeking Ghosts website. They actually have a picture of the slaughterhouse, and so when you come up to it, it's on the back side. In order to get into it, you have to go around the side where the stables were, where they kept the animals and all that. So you come through the back, and it's pretty dark in there and pretty narrow. So we walk through the stables, and it's just an eerie feeling throughout the whole time we were in there. So let's see. So we go through the stables, which lead up into the area where they slaughtered the animals and where the fridges were and all that, and it was like 2 stories. So it opened up pretty well. And there was I guess you could say dry blood on the floors and the walls. And
it is a slaughterhouse.
True, yeah. And they still had the chains with the hooks around in there. And so we just, the kid, I forget the kid's name, but The one with the video camera, he was just recording the whole time we were there. We went upstairs. There's nobody else in there. So we decided to finally leave because it was starting to get dark outside. As we came around back from the stable, there's just this peacock just out of nowhere, just right there in front of us. Come on, New Jersey. How often does Jersey have peacocks roaming around?
Yeah, I've never. I mean, other than going to maybe to one of the zoos or something like that, I don't think I never saw a peacock till I went to Italy when I was in the military.
So we thought that was a little weird and out of the norm, So all right, let's get out of here. I think it's a good time to get out of here. So as we were leaving and going around the backside where the windows were and everything, the kid decided to take one last look with the video camera and scan the whole place. And as he was scanning the place, he's got this figure up in the second window, like this pale, like a human figure, kind of like looking down at us. And we all looked away from the video camera, and we could see that there's nobody up there.
So you could see the them kids are awesome. So you could look up and with your eyes at the window, and there was nothing there. But when you looked on the viewfinder for the camera, you could actually see a figure in the window.
Right. And which was creepy. So this kid, he kept the video and he brought it to his class and showed it to his class. So he showed it to other people.
Yeah.
In the Marlboro High School back then. So.
Bro, that's creepy, man.
Yeah, no, it freaked us out. So we booked our asses back to our cars, and that was the last time I ever went there.
Good Lord. All right, so here's where it connects, guys. So this is a story I'm going to read. I'm going to read part of it for everybody so they understand this legend, all right?
Okay.
The Marlboro Psychiatric Hospital. It was torn down in 2013, right? And park stands in place to this day, but that building had been stood for a very long time. There was a full-size psychiatric hospital that was right down the street from this slaughterhouse that you had gone to. A farmer named Alan, and this is the popular story. Here's the story that everyone's heard in New Jersey. And upon further review of my memory of childhood, I do remember hearing this story before. All right, so a farmer named Alan owned the land that the hospital was built on. 500-acre farm had been his family for generations, but the state wanted the rural property for their new hospital. Mr. Allen refused to sell, but it didn't matter to the government. They seized his property, kicking him off his land. This took Mr. Allen's livelihood away. He was a farmer and owned the slaughterhouse, and he lost everything he owned, and it said he went mad. Once the hospital was complete, staff began to see Mr. Allen wandering the property late at night, muttering to himself. As time passed, he became more irrational. When the hospital staff tried to remove him, he attacked them. Ironically, after this, he was committed to the very facility that was built on his land. One day, he disappeared off of the property as a patient. A huge manhunt was organized, but Mr. Allen was never found. Months after this, late at night, strange animalistic squeals were heard near the old abandoned slaughterhouse on the hospital property. These squeals became louder and louder until they began to disturb patients. Now, in my opinion, this is a caveat, but it doesn't take much to disturb mental health patients. It doesn't have to be screaming all that loud. It could be any kind of random noise to disturb mental health patients. I mean, you put a bunch of crazy people inside of a building together, they're just going to perpetuate crazy.
Yeah, one thing will set everybody off.
Right. So several became so hysterical they had to be sedated. Marlboro then hired extra security guards to patrol the grounds. One night, a guard found a strange message written in blood on the side of the slaughterhouse. The message says, "I see you, and tonight you will die." He told the supervisor what he'd found and then returned to his patrol. The next morning, it was discovered the guard was missing. Several searchers entered the slaughterhouse. They opened the doors and found in the huge metal freezer the missing guard's body hanging from one of the hooks on the chains. He was covered in blood, his head was missing, and in his place was a severed pig's head. The murderer was never found, but late after, several witnesses said they saw the ghost of Farmer Allen poking his head out of a hole in the slaughterhouse, and it was believed his ghost must have killed the guard. Now, that is a really creepy story. But here's the one thing that's going to suck. It's all myth. That story is not true at all. There is, you can look it up on Snopes. You can go search it up. and there is no connection to that at all to being real. But that is not the end of the story. Andrew's claim of some weird shit going on at the slaughterhouse, because Marlboro Psychiatric Hospital, its real history is almost just as creepy as that story, if not more. So the Marlboro Psychiatric Hospital. You read up about the history of it? Do you have anything you want to note about the history, Andrew?
There's stories. That's gone on of the torturement that took place there. How many patients have died there from, the abuse and the torturement, and these experiments that supposedly went on in there.
Yeah, so they did a lot of experimental treatment on mental health patients there. And when Andrew talks about how many people died there, 1,500 patients have died while being in care. 1,500. There's the graveyard that's right up the road, which is actually not too far from the slaughterhouse itself, has 900 graves of unclaimed psychiatric patients. In 1993, there was a senator, Richard Cody, established a fake background for himself, and that reflected he was a sex offender. And even with all that, he still got a job at the place, so which that showed that they weren't doing no background checks on any of their employees. He found rampant patient abuse, wasteful spending, and other illegal practices. The hospital was closed down several years later, leading up to Andrew going there in college and visiting it, scaring the shit out of himself. But here's some of the really creepy information that I was able to pull up about the Marlboro Psychiatric Hospital. In 1946, a hospital attendant was charged with beating a patient almost to death because he lost his temper. In 1995, Regina Killen, a 64-year-old patient, she died of a broken neck after being lifted from the floor and getting her head wedged into a wheelchair.
What?
Yeah, and so
that's a little crazy.
There was noted sexual abuse of female patients by hospital staff. There was experimental treatments like selective sterilization and eugenics. And those kind of things have horrible, horrible pasts. And here's where it gets really creepy. So there was a noted amount of suicides. There's been noted 15 suicides just in an 18-year time period. 4 suicides being in the basement in a 2-month span. Multiple criminally insane patients had been placed there that had broke out.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say they've had multiple breakouts.
That was the big thing that I remember from us being kids, was that there was always somebody breaking out of the Marlboro mental facility, and they would just end up like roaming down the highways into different towns, and
in their robes, in their hospital garments.
I remember a specific one for sure that I recall was it was actually Route 9 in Freehold. This woman had gotten out, and she was walking down the street in Route 9 in Freehold, probably around where the mall is now. For those of you who were in New Jersey, it was right before the mall opened up.
The Freehold Raceway Mall.
The Freehold Raceway Mall, and it was like 2 a.m. The Freehold police respond to a report of a woman in some kind of hospital robes walking down the highway, like down the middle of the highway. Now they show up.
I was going to say, that's quite a ways from Marlboro for her to be on foot.
Right, and she was on foot. She had made her way to Route 9, and she's walking down Route 9 in the middle of the night. They walk up to her to address her, and she ends up pulling out a butcher's knife and starts stabbing herself as she runs down the highway. There was people that had broken out and froze to death on the actual grounds. All kinds of just really, really creepy stuff. So for years, this site has also become a place that a lot of people like to go to do ghost hunts.
Yeah.
And for unknown reasons, up until the building was torn down recently in the last couple of years, the government had like police officers or security people patrolling the grounds, keeping people away from going near the building. You could speculate as to why all you want, but that is kind of weird that they had their own security force keeping young kids and local people from going into the building. I don't remember very many buildings that were abandoned in New Jersey having that kind of attention.
Yeah.
So there must have been something. There must have been something that the government knew about the building that they wanted to keep people out of there.
And I was going to say, like, because must have been when we went up there. We started there's like a path from the slaughterhouse kind of up to the hospital.
Right.
On the backside. And before even us going into the slaughterhouse, we walked up that path, and then that's when we saw the actual security force. They're like, oh, so we backed off and went just decided to go into the slaughterhouse instead.
Yeah. So there's the one last thing, and this one I saved for the end of this because I just thought it was just choice. So in 1995, which probably means that you guys were probably, and this is going to creep you out, Andrew. I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to really creep you out, but you didn't walk up to the hospital, right? You stayed at the slaughterhouse, not realizing that at the time the hospital was still in operation when you went up there. And so in 1995, a man named William Jennings, who was committed to the hospital following murdering his own parents, had left the hospital, walked out. And you want to guess where he was found?
In the slaughterhouse?
No, it's even worse than that. This guy was found in Walt Disney World.
Really?
Walking around Walt Disney World, confused and disoriented.
How'd they find him down there?
How'd he get down there? Every single state in the entire United States has its own prison or psychiatric facility. But I can guarantee you that if you talk to people from New Jersey, that the Marlboro Psychiatric Facility has a lot more than just a couple of ghost stories surrounding it that'll really make you stay up at night. Making sure that the doors are locked. You never know who broke out of the Marlboro Mental Institution. Might be walking down the street. I find it deeply disturbing that a person jumped at 1995 who had killed both his parents, broke out of Marlboro Mental Institution, and somehow made his way all the way to Florida, into Disney World, and then was found there. I want to invite you guys to come back next week. We're going to have some more stories, some more guests, and some more familiar names, some more familiar voices from the Change Your POV network, and some new people. And guys, I'm going to break out of that character that I've been going on here this entire show, just to remind you guys that this is all about having a little bit of fun. Even though the stories that we're telling that are the true life stories are actually true, all those links will be inside the show notes page for you guys to go out and check out. If you got little kids around and they listen to some of those serial killer things and some of the other stuff that's creeped out, listen, I warned you at the beginning. So if your kid's in there and he's listening to it, one of two things is going to happen. The kid's going to be really creeped out, or the kid's enjoying the hell out of themselves like I was when I was that age. Here, no big deal. If your kid is really into like horror and all that kind of spooky, scary stuff, no big deal. They're going to grow up probably to be just like me. And we both know that there's really nothing... I'm not going to lie to you. There's something wrong with it. Go get that kid some help. You do not want that kid growing up to be like me. But in the meanwhile, guys, we'll check you out next time on Change Your POV and Changing Hearts and Minds.